You're listening to Malmborg Report, where we discuss the intersection of creativity, work, and the systems in which they are shaped. Welcome to Malmborg Report. My guest today is a multimedia artist, a lecturer, an all-around really fun guy, Michael Chernoff. How's it going, Mike? What's up?
I'm good. I'm here for the call. I don't know.
I gave this guy a call. He showed up. He doesn't know what this is.
Yes. We have a pretty long history, the two of us.
For sure.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's like the best place to work out, but yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell. I don't want to give hard.
That's you in a nutshell. You just opened up your computer. There was a Zoom ring, and then it's me on the other end.
Yeah. I'm sitting in front of my computer a lot, waiting for things to happen.
Well, that's somewhat of a metaphor of the times we live in, right? We're looking for this, whether it's a job opportunity or something of the like, attention economy, sitting at our devices, looking to make a lot of action there,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We are we're caught in the postmodern condition of watching. We're waiting for the answers to arrive.
Yeah, but today we'll try to probe for some actual answers, cut through the algorithm, the matrix, and get some real answers going on here.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I guess that's like I guess that's kind of where my head is at with a lot of my work these days, dealing with virtuality and interaction and sort of like the conglomeration around video signal, video technology. I'm working a lot with, media environments and like how video screens and signal work in that space of like, basically the presence of technology. Is what I'm working on a lot these days with my installations, partially with my films, but that's kind of taken a backseat recently. But yeah, I really deal with, all things. I mean, as you know, I hope you know, I deal with all things video related.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned before, we've known each other a very long time. I've seen your work from drawings to indie films to your wider scale installation work. So yeah, I've really enjoyed seeing you sort of go head first into the realm of video and signal art and that sort of stuff, because that's always been your aesthetic for sure, but now it's sort of developed into like a brand, if you will.
Right. But, for some background, we were roommates at one time. And actually, at that time, I wasn't really doing that stuff. I had kind of taken a backseat on doing heavily experimental real-time processing. I think that stuff kind of showed up more in some of the music video projects for Dirty Fatty that we were involved with. But that had more to do with heavy handed usage of digital effects and like Final Cut Express and things like that. But yeah, I took a step back, and then for a while, then I went back into doing the processing again. I kind of go back and forth. It's a very difficult thing to commodify, because even when I'm looking for like job descriptions, like most people are not looking for that kind of thing. Multimedia rigging, signal processing, and like that kind of like interactive media. It's like a harder market.
Yeah, it's very performance based. It's not like a tactical skill that has a lot of traditional market value. It's rather something that has to be contextualized and presented in a creative space and consumed in that way.
Yeah, and that's why I have this branding of video archaeology right now.
Yeah. And that ties in to some degree to your education as well, based on how you described your program.
Oh, you mean the
master's program?
Yeah. So I did a master's at the Department of Media Study at the University of Buffalo. It's not really specifically one type of mode of production. Arguably, I think they probably need more specialization of their MFAs, because my MFA was just media art production. That could be a lot of different things. It could be film, it could be video games, it could just be interactive media in a broader sense. Um, it also, I guess, could just be, yeah, well, like what I was doing, more like multimedia installation. But I wouldn't say at this time they have a super strong focus on video art, but in the past they did. In this department, it's a historicized department in the field of media arts, technology, media studies.
I vaguely recall maybe it was just a course you took or something you wrote that there was a media archaeology angle. Is that something I'm misremembering?
I mean, yeah, that's kind of like a riff that I do with the video archaeology,
Yeah.
more specific. There's supposed to be a media archaeology effort going on at that department. It's like digital humanities, so you'll always get like it's not hard science, it's art and stuff like that. Do you know much of like what this term like media archaeology means?
I've heard it described before, but perhaps you could give a more formal definition.
It's this kind of, well, we don't really have this so much in the US. It's more of a European model. This idea of like arts research, or you could call it creative research or practice-led research. It's this idea that it's kind of like a decolonial framework where like the decolonial academics are always trying to find these alternative histories against like the dominant narrative of, like white, Western, heteronormative, Christian, those kinds of things where it's sort of like history seems inevitable because it's written by the winners. So decolonial thinking is trying to unroot or disembed those dominant narratives by looking at these other forms of like ignored histories. So media archaeology is looking at like media as these like physical objects of knowledge. When I took this course, we start with Michel Foucault and him talking about the history of knowledge because it's all based on texts and printout papers, scrolls, artifacts, like physical media that's analog. That's not what he was writing about media archaeology, but that's where some scholars get their start. And then it goes into this imagination land because decolonial thinking is also like is highly imaginative of like alternative histories by working with the past, you like shape the future.
Because it requires speculation if there isn't documentation. Yeah.
Right. There's some speculation. So then you can start going in kind of like otherworldly things where it's like with media archaeology specifically, what a lot of artists and academics like to do is they like to either work with old material or they like to try and get their hands on old technologies to play back video or interactive experiences or audio, whatever it is, the way it was intended. And then they kind of take it in another direction where then they start using it in obsolescence to do really weird things that then say something about how technology is used in the present for like a future circumstance. So I think the best example I like from all that is Garland. He made a car and he took the video game Burnout, this idea that you're looking at a video game made by Sega as like your windshield, and then you're driving through physical space and actually the game graphic is updating to the turning of the wheel. So it's kind of like this idea of like how reality will be overlaid with 3D graphics with VR technology and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like virtual unreality or something, right? Where it's like kind of inverting the action of experiencing the false world, but you're actually still doing the real thing, but you have a virtual lens through which you're doing it.
Yeah. Or, like just this like augmentation of reality through technology. And then there's been other people that have just tried to conceptualize technologies that don't exist.
Yeah.
And then create them in the present, or like computers that never actually worked that like they did in theory and they tried to create them in the present. So it's a very out there thing, but even though if you're not doing that, that's kind of been a thing with like a lot of contemporary art, is that it becomes less about product and more about the experimentation and like treating art as like a research object. So I kind of that would be the short answer. It's like treating art as like a treating media, art, and technology as a research object.
Very cool. Very cool. So, one thing, as you are probably aware, I've been very tuned into the idea of labor recently. I've been involved in, labor organizing. I've been expanding that into fellow Amazonian here, former Amazonian, and I've been expanding this into the media framework, and I, we all produce labor, and you know no matter what your industry is, there is sort of a common thread that I see. And because I've operated as a creative person, I have access to a lot of creative people to talk to them about work and labor from their perspective. So I just want to kind of get a sense of two things. One, how is your current relationship with your labor? And how do you view these things more broadly?
How's your labor life?
Yeah, labor check-in.
Yeah. Not how is your sex life? How's your labor life?
Well, yeah,
My labor life is very fluid and flexible at the moment. Actually, it's kind of like full of like kind of like strikes and gutter balls, to quote Big Lebowski. But I mean, I guess not to get too detailed, but the university that I just teach at part time is not doing so hot. And they told me that they're not going to have availability for me to teach there next semester, which is fine because I kind of already mentally prepared for that scenario because I kind of like saw the writing on the wall after like I taught in the fall of last year. So, everybody is like scrambling for academic jobs, me included. But I would say actually at this point, I'm still throwing my hat in the ring, but I'm not as gung ho or optimistic about landing like a job in higher education doing that, just because of the competition and the lack of positions and colleges closing and things like that.
yeah, and the current landscape doesn't really help either. Like questions about where are grants going and government funding. Is
Yeah.
Doge going to come for it, right?
Yeah, I would say that's much more likely than not. And also, I'm just like working remotely and on freelance schedules. So it's kind of like a hard thing right now where I have certain work opportunities that the hope would be they're going to lead to other opportunities. But at the same time, I'm looking for something more stable. But then if I had something more stable, I mean, I had just posted a meme about this last night. It's like, I got a job, my portfolio just died.
I think that's like core, like Malmborg report, like is like this tension between these two things, right? Like where, taking more transient, often lower paid opportunities kind of puts you more in the creative mix, maybe puts you in a better position to network or to sort of expand your mind. But settling into something that is well compensated, stable, reliable might complicate your creative life. Not always, these are general ideas, but I think that is a recurring thread.
Yeah, you would like them to be married, ideally.
Yeah, and I think that's where, at least from my analysis, I sort of see that it's sort of a high level mission of workers, creative workers, to find ways to be compensated for work that isn't stifling them.
Work that isn't stifling them. Can you say more about that?
Work that is creatively rewarding, part of their actual skill sets and talents without being overly beholden to market forces.
Right, right. Well, that would be the ideal situation. And I think prior to going to grad school, I think I was probably more in that camp. But surprisingly, in the last few years, I've become definitely more focused on performativity with the stuff I'm making.
Right.
Where I wouldn't say you want to quantify everything in dollars because I do think, obviously capital makes things happen, but also if things can't generate capital, then things don't happen. I think that is sort of a true test of like endorsement of a particular creative pursuit. Do people purchase something? And then two, do you get funding for it? And not too long ago, I had an exhibition opportunity that I turned down because there was no funding for it.
Right. Which is not just a question of like, oh, am I being well compensated for it? It's also a question of, am I going to lose money by doing it?
Oh yeah, I was going
You
to
know?
absolutely.
So it's like, even if you're down for the like exposure thing, once things actually have a budget and it like, takes significant time, labor, transportation to do it, coming out behind isn't something most people are keen to do.
Yeah, no, no. Then you think about like all the budget items that have to be accounted for. It's like I just can't do this. I'm not in my 20s. Like if
Yeah.
you're in your 20s, maybe you can be reckless like that because you're just, trying to get in somewhere. But I'm like, yeah, no, I'm too old to do that sort of thing. So I backed out of
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's just a more mature option.
Yeah, for sure. I think over time I've gotten to that point too. A lot of my creative work was often independently driven stuff and presented in an independent context, but taking on a serious project without a clear income stream from it is it's not just a question of do I want to, it's a question of do I even have the capacity to. But I still think it's more of a uh, conditioning to the capitalist society we live in. It's not so much a an ideal; it's more of a response
Hmm.
and part of our leveraging of our labor and our time.
Right. But you make money off of it. You get to do more of what you like.
Yeah, if you stack it, and then you flip it, right?
Yeah, yeah, I know. Like if the film, like with filmmaking, it's like if the film does it make money or doesn't get money, then there is no money to
Yeah.
make the next film. Or, even the current, like, it's just like that's just how it works. It's just like you gotta go for the one thing to the next thing to the next thing. It's like you need the funding.
Now, films are crazy, actually, in particular, like, in terms of how expensive they are. They
Depends.
are exceptionally labor intensive, but they're also very space intensive. And yeah, films are. I can't think of anything on the scale of films in the creative field. What do you think of that?
On the creative field, you could say web design is, its own thing. If we're,
Smaller nodes, though, right?
yeah, you're talking about narrative work. Is that kind of like where you're
You could say narrative work, artistic work.
right? Well, it depends on what you want to do. Because right now I'm like filming this. I can maybe I'm done filming it now. I'm just like fully editing it. I'm doing like another one of my experimental documentaries of this empty landscape that's in Buffalo. It's not too far from my house. That takes no money, really. But
For sure.
if I wanted to do more of it, if I wanted to do a lot more of it, then like that thing that was nothing, then I get paid to do something else. But yeah, if you want to do like narrative stuff, you need the money because
Staged and narrated, exactly. Like doing captured footage is kind of a hack, if you will, for like producing a cheap film, but it's also its own style and intent. But yeah, if you're staging a whole film with a setting and a cast of characters and all that, with lines and environments, that these films cost, on the high end, what, in the upper hundreds of millions, maybe pushing a billion, right?
right. Well, not well. There hasn't been $1 billion movie yet.
There has been one from
Oh wait, well, there was
Tim
the
and
one.
Eric. Yeah.
That wasn't a I mean, that was
Nah,
the
yeah, yeah. I'm joking.
we
We have a
we
little
have
Tim and Eric thing too.
yeah yeah we'll get to that. But well, what you're also talking about is the dogma of quality, because that's why when you said filmmaking, I like immediately said, well, it depends,
Sure.
because Hollywood is not all filmmaking, but that's what in a mainstream, that's where our minds go to when we hear films. We think Hollywood because it's everywhere, it's big, it's powerful, it's advertised, so it fills in a lot of like cultural nooks. Um, it's like there's a difference in my book between a film director and a filmmaker, whereas the film director is a role, and oftentimes, they get wrapped into the label of filmmaker, or they start out as filmmakers. But, in a Hollywood production, everybody has a specific role and they all come together. Filmmaker is a little more grassroots because you tend to do more than one role, and it's kind of more like akin to being a painter than like a Hollywood filmmaker in that way. So it's much more personal process, and it's cheaper because you don't need so many people to do it. Or it's like a dozen people instead of like almost 100 people.
Yeah, yeah, there's definitely varying degrees to which you could scale a film down or up. And you're right to say that filmmaking in the popular imagination is centered around the Hollywood theatrical release and that sort of thing. But as a medium itself, it's not inherently uniquely expensive or anything. It's at least now. um,
Well, yeah, you can make things for pretty cheap with how you can scrape things off the internet.
oh yeah, I mean you can scrape things. You can potentially generate things, and you can capture footage with a cell phone, a small handheld camera. There's different ways to make moving images for sure.
I would just say one more thing about that filmmaker
Yeah, sure.
topic is whether we're talking about narrative stuff, documentary stuff, I tend to think, first of all, that term filmmaker is an outdated term technically because of digital video. And that's like a whole thing. I could also talk about the difference between the traditional, you worked on actual photo stock versus these digital files. But I think now in like this time of like digital media and digital cinema and that takeover of the filmmaking term, I tend to think filmmakers are more like organizers. They're more like people that have to put a narrative together, obviously, through like a series of events where you're literally leading an audience through these sequences of sound and image to do some kind of communication, which, the contrast to that would be a non-linear narrative, which would be like as simple as going on your computer and surfing the internet and going through things and programs. I like to think of like that as fluid narrative where we're not really aware of the narrative because we're not thinking about our history. If we clicked on this object, looked at this, go to that. And that's like really the two things of we have these computer narratives where you can go through media, but there is no set sequence of events that you have to follow, versus filmmaking, which you still have to follow this sequence. So it's really just two different narrative forms. I think like those are big differences that popped out at me when I thought about it more.
Yeah, the way we interface with information via our technology and our phones and our computer devices is almost like a never-ending film, choose your own
Right.
adventure film.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or there's the idea that reality is actually fragments, but we think about our lives and this, reconstructed narrative again, like what can we remember, things like that. And yeah, you can scroll on these social media platforms and go to whatever website, and you could either watch video content passively or just be involved in comments and sharing and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a narrative that like kind of just builds off itself. But rarely are we ever going to actually think about the sequence of events that led from this to that to that to this. But
Yeah,
our devices know, the information networks know, they have the narrative written down.
for sure. Yeah, the way, because if everything was assumed to be static at first with just input, output, and different streams or points or nodes become more enhanced, or you could say viral. The thing that led to that could have infinite amounts of nuance, right? It could be something that maybe speaks to something that is sort of conscious in the popular mindset at the moment. It could be related to sort of like internal online inside jokes or memes and that kind of thing. So, yeah, but in terms of a grand narrative that starts from the present and is traced all the way back to its origin, with the amount of information we're processing, is exceptionally complicated. Generating such narratives, even if it's on an experimental, speculative, or even just creative basis, could give people a really cool look at a version of reality that we live in, potentially.
Step it back for me.
That was heavy.
So you were saying that the node narrative that like flows through, you're saying the creatives are the one that like bring attention to that, or
They certainly could. In the practice of media archaeology, perhaps, right? In constructing a digital narrative over whatever length of time they might wish to choose, could actually give people a glimpse at human psychology, media distribution, current events, and all of that. So I think there could be legitimate value, like not just in sort of a creative sense even, but like in terms of like understanding the world we live in.
yeah. Well, I mean, yes and no. I think definitely there are always going to be responses to trends and social topics and our whole culture based on technology doing the communications for us, like this carry through. But I think with the creatives, you want to bring to light the fact that that is going on. You want to bring to the fact like that these things are actually influencing our lives, which is why I was saying before about media environments and this interest in the presence of technology and how it impacts, how it determines experience is a big part of my creative pursuits. But I think people already know, in the back of their minds that our devices are writing this, writing that. I'm aware that when I, am talking to ChatGPT, it's basing responses off previous conversations. And I even ask it, are you coming up with this answer because of our previous conversations? And it will concede yes. But even like far ahead or like way before, anything we have now, a really well-known media theoretician, Friedrich Hitler, he's basically the German next step after Marshall McLuhan, if you're keeping up on like media studies. Hitler had a really good book called Gramophone Film Typewriter. And you'd think with me film would be like the most interesting part because the book is broken up into those three sections besides the introduction. But the point of the book is to talk about first how humans started using technology, then how technology starts influencing human thinking or like creative output, and then how ultimately technology start doing the thinking and the labor for us. And specifically with typewriter, Hitler was talking, or he wrote about, how the typewriter came into vogue in offices of secretaries and like doing transpondence. Then he's talking about how the typewriter actually informs thinking because you're punching keys and stuff like that, and you're doing like the runner back and forth, the ribbon runner, and like all this kind of stuff. And then he starts going to how actually technologies are doing the writing of our history now for us. We're no longer doing the writing; they're doing the writing. They know more about us, and he's not talking about social media networks or anything because I believe he wrote this text in the 90s. This is like long before, ubiquitous computing and like mobile technologies are like with us all the time. He built this framework of how we like start by like making the technology that controls us and then starts watching us and recording us and all this other stuff. But like people are always like, nervously making jokes like, oh yeah, this ad's coming up because of my consumption. I said something about this. There's the listeners all over the place. So we could do like Black Mirror like infinitely and we could have these discussions and whatnot. But at the end of the day, we can't close the door on these communications.
No, and it's not necessarily the case that these communications are not beneficial, because it could be exceptionally beneficial in terms of understanding the needs of people, allowing people to have access to resources that they otherwise wouldn't. So I don't think there's an inherent, in my mind, at least not yet, I don't see an inherent need to sort of tear it all down technologically. But I think my beefs are probably more with the economic structure in which they are owned, controlled, and disseminated.
Hmm. So what are your beefs?
In terms of the way commerce is conducted and where people derive employment, income, etc., basically everything is touching through a very small. I'm going to lose sponsors in the future, but running through, the big five tech companies, right? You got your Microsoft, you got your Google, you got your Amazon, Meta, etc. And, like, is there too much control for these companies? Do they have too much influence over our society? Do they have too much power in leveraging government and regulation or protection from regulation? I would say yes, very yes. And I think that has played a role in the political and economic situation we have today, which I believe has led to essentially the early stages of a complete erosion of a civil society, a functionally, culturally thriving society, at least in the United States so far.
So you're saying these networks are causing things to decay, not enhance?
No, I wouldn't say the networks themselves. And I mean, there can definitely be complex, and I'm not equipped to do it at this moment, but you could definitely make cases for net erosion or net gain. I'm talking about the structure of the proprietors of these things and how they influence society more broadly. And that certainly does include information campaigns, sometimes run by state actors and the like. So, yeah, I think I'm not anti-technology at all, but I definitely don't know if we collectively have the wherewithal or the flexibility to use it for the greater good in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
But that's pure speculation on my part.
So you're saying we don't think we have the wherewithal to use it in a good way?
Yeah, I would say potentially we run the risk of a lack of control over these things and how they are used in society to the point where, I mean, to the book you mentioned that was written in the 1990s, the idea that we're not writing it, it's writing it for us, right? And without sufficient kind of central vision or oversight, where does that land us ultimately? Do we know? I
Mm-hmm.
don't know.
Well, it was never about controlling our lives.
That's not what I'm claiming either.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the end result potentially.
Yeah, I know, but like
Yeah.
that's the thing with communications is that it is about control. It's about controlling the populace.
And controlling networks.
Well, yeah, control some certain people control the networks, but that's sort of, a whole thing on like machine society and government, there's always you look at like someone like Althusser and his view on what is it, anarchist, socialism. He made this great point that when we talk about changing things, we're never talking about dismantling things. We're talking about assuming control of stuff. So all the solutions are that we just assume control of power. Those are government, those are institutions. We're talking about specifically here in networks by like, these tech conglomerates. And like the idea is that, oh, if we got rid of like Mark Zuckerberg and we made it like a popular forum or whatever, a socialist,
A nationalized, yeah.
nationalized like a utility that like it would make things all the better. But at the end of the day, someone's going to have specialized knowledge. Someone's going to have control. So yeah, it's really crazy to conceptualize those things, but like these people have like built up these services and these information networks that do control us. I mean, even before that, it was, phone companies, television, newspapers. This is just the latest iteration
Right.
of these things. But like that idea of like communication is just like the core principle of cybernetics, where cybernetics is just the relations between non-living things and organic animals and humans, and like, this idea of control and communication between those groups. So how do you use technology to do control? And some of that is like, hitting a button and a signal goes off and a whole relay of things happens. And then another thing is just disseminating messages over a network and people, um, getting it. Actually, I was just like thinking over the weekend, like, does the internet count as mass media? Because mass media is this thing of like everybody sees the same thing, everybody gets the same thing. And
Yeah.
I don't think we think of the internet as mass media.
Yeah, there are probably like certain touch points that could probably qualify. Say if there was like a static homepage of a major website or something that didn't have custom feeds in it. But yeah, I mean, it's so dynamic that perhaps that changes the equation.
Well, it gets complicated when you think about like video streaming services. Because I was just reading this article that was bringing up these thoughts that was basically the premise was that the internet is anti-television because the author was framing like the like ARPANET and like the initial like implementation of the internet was going to be this, it was obvious, it was based on email and postcard media where you're going to like freely like send things and create things, and like we're not your people are not going to be submitted to the dumb system of television, which just like broadcasts the same thing across a whole swath of a region or a continent, and everybody is like seeing it at the same time, and they're all plugged in, tuned in to the same thing. But then it gets complicated because the article talks about how over time the internet became a caterer for video content, and actually had to keep up with the supply and demand of servers and like connectivity to deliver video, which was impossible in the early days of the internet. But then it starts taking on this quality of television, or it starts acting in like as like a correspondent with television. And the two networks, television and the internet. I don't know where they go, but like that, like the idea is like, does it count as mass media in the case of like video streaming? Because when like something happens on Apple TV or like Netflix, everybody is like running to those applications to,
Right, the big drop, the new thing or whatever,
yeah.
right?
Now with cinema being on the internet as well, new movie releases.
Yeah, yeah. Well, those are questions to be answered and debated or considered over time. But in the interest of time, I will conclude our conversation. But really, though, Michael, thank you for coming on. This has been a high level, interesting conversation, and I hope you enjoyed yourself. I really appreciate you for coming on the show.
Great. I'm glad to be here.
All right.
If you're interested in seeing some of my installation work, I will be at the Tri-Main Center in Buffalo, New York on March 29th for Trimania, where I'll be doing a multi-channel video installation. I also do have an upcoming installation project funded by the Buffalo Institute of Contemporary Art, which will be happening at some point in April. It'll be when that happens. That'll be running for a month or two. So if you want to find out more information about these things, you can just follow me at Instagram for updates on those projects. The handle is at Video Archaeology, all one word.
All right, Mike. Thank you. Talk later.
All right. I'll talk to you later, John. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Malmborg Report. If you enjoyed this episode, follow me on social media at It's John Malmborg and subscribe to Malmborg Report on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Want to stay in the loop? Sign up for my email list at johnmalmborg.com. And if you'd like to support the show directly, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Malmborg Report. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you next time.